my little cherry picks. Good day at school.
Fall in love with the Larkins. Watch the full series now on ITV Hub, or you can watch ad-free on BritBox.
All right.
Hey.
Fancy a cuppa?
Sure.
How was the dreaded school?
It was all right.
There you go. What about that girl, Sophie? You spoken to her yet?
No, but it's whatever.
So it doesn't bother you?
No, not really.
Okay. Look, you know you can talk to me, right? I'm here.
Actually, Dad, it's just that any time I go over to her, she doesn't talk to me or she walks away, and then I've been messaging her.
Now with all the latest headlines, it's the ITV News.
We got a clear sense today of the kind of public reaction we can expect over the next 8 days, as the Queen's coffin left her beloved Balmoral for its final journey south. Thousands upon thousands of people lined up to say their own farewells. On bridges, in fields, and on the streets of Edinburgh itself, until it was finally welcomed into its temporary place of rest in the smallest royal palace at Holyrood by her daughter Anne. After a few days in which the pace of events and indeed of change has been dramatic, the mood today was more sombre and once again incredibly sad. Also on News at 10.
Prince Charles Philip Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign, of happy memory,
become our only lawful and rightful liege lord, Charles III.
Y mae coron teyrnas unedig Prydain Fawr a Gogledd Iwerddon.
We have a new king, as it has been for centuries. The proclamation was read out today around the country and the realms overseas. Not now. The Australian government rules out a referendum on the monarchy, in the short term at least. Potential trouble for Putin as loyalists start to turn on their leader over the debacle in Ukraine. And the extraordinary sights of Buckingham Palace as old and young come to London to pay their respects.
Buses are grey, she's king, long live our new king, God save our king.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. When the Queen retreated to the Balmoral estate 52 days ago for her long summer holiday, it was, as we now sadly know, the last time she was seen outside its welcoming gates. This morning, her oak coffin began the journey back towards the seats of a sovereign's power. It was topped with a wreath of white flowers from the estate's gardens, including late-blooming sweet peas, her favourites. The hearse wove along the byways and arrowed along the A-roads of Aberdeenshire. Tonight, the Queen's body lies in Holyrood House in Edinburgh, the smallest royal palace. There, its royal staff can say their private goodbyes. The coffin was welcomed into the city along its royal mile with respectful applause from thousands upon thousands of people, and it was met at the doors of Holyrood with a deep curtsy from Princess Anne. She had driven behind her mother's hearse for more than 6 hours.
Her death has been reported, but when the in the royal it all felt very real. The only sound, the rhythm of the waters of the River Dee, which the Queen crossed for the last time. Ahead, a 6.5-hour journey from Royal Deeside to Scotland's capital. But before the big cities, the small village neighbouring the estate, Ballater. The nation has lost a monarch, but here they say they lost a neighbour. These are the people who would often see their sovereign shopping.
Much loved in this area, and I thought it was fitting that people came out to say her, pass their respects on for her.
Atop the coffin, flowers picked from the estate, sweet peas, the Queen's favourite among them. And following close behind, her daughter Anne, a journey which would test the resolve of anyone. She was a monarch, yes, but a countrywoman at heart, who was honoured by the country people she passed today. Guards of honour came in different shapes and sizes. Tractors in one field, horses in another. In some places there was silence and heads were bowed. In others, a ripple of applause. But where people could gather, they did. Aberdeen, Dundee, and the villages and roads in between. In laybys, on roadsides, and on the bridges over the top.
It's a sad moment because that's the end of the era. It feels sad that we'll not see her again.
And then to the newest of the 3 great bridges which span the Firth of Forth, the Queensferry Crossing. This one she opened herself just 5 years before. Today it carried the late Queen safely over the waters below to yet another crowd on the other side. By now the cortege was on the outskirts of the capital. Just about everything and everyone seemed to stop. From Edinburgh's New Town, where the streets are named after Hanoverian kings who reigned before her, to Edinburgh's ancient Old Town and the narrow cobbled street known as the Royal Mile. Every inch taken, every screen in record.
Being a woman and being a queen, we're not going to see that for the next 3 generations, and it means a lot.
Never seen her on record. 70 years she ruled our country, and it was brilliant. I loved her, I did.
Finally, to the palace of Holyrood House, her house, the official seat of monarchy in Scotland. A bow from her sons, a curtsy from her daughter-in-law. This first long journey was at an end. It fell to 8 infantrymen from the Royal Regiment of Scotland to carry their late Commander-in-Chief inside. The first bearer party of many in the coming days. As they did so, a curtsy from the Queen's only daughter. Tonight, at the foot of the imposing Arthur's Seat in this great capital city, the coffin rests in the throne room. Her Majesty's chaplains in Scotland are keeping vigil. Chris Ship, News at 10 at the Palace of Holyrood House.
Before the Queen's coffin reached Edinburgh, the reign of her son, King Charles, was proclaimed in the city centre. The ancient form of words rang out there and indeed in the capitals of Wales and Northern Ireland. They echoed too in towns and villages, just as they have for centuries at the start of a new reign.
He has been the king for 3 full days, and yet thanks to the curious glories of the nation over which he now reigns, across that land today, the new sovereign was still being proclaimed.
God save the King.
Declarations a day later than London to echo the era when words that bore momentous weight were carried by horseback.
Prince Charles, Philip, Arthur George is now, by the death of our late sovereign, of happy memory,
become our only lawful and right.
From Belfast to Edinburgh.
Charles III.
Y mae coron Teyrnas Unedig Prydain Fawr a Gogledd Iwerddon.
And a reminder too that since its foundation, the United Kingdom has been a place of diverse people and language.
I ran y tywysog Charles, Philip, Arthur, George.
From the splendour of state occasions,
oh yay! Oh yay!
to the steps of City Hall in Norwich, crowded with people, their pets and good wishes.
God save the King! God save the King!
In Cambridge, a scholar's salute.
3 cheers for His Majesty the King. Hip hip!
Hooray!
It was a day for civil dignitaries and Lord Mayors in their finery. A day to celebrate.
Here's a picture for you.
And a day to remember.
Joy and sorrow, I think, is the passing of the Queen and the incoming of the King.
Today's been a wonderful occasion. Pomp and ceremony is what we do best.
It was a chance for us to actually participate. We've watched it non-stop on television, but this makes you feel more part of what's going on.
To the Channel Island of Sark.
We, therefore, the seigneur of the Fief of Sark,
Europe's smallest feudal state, and Jersey, nearer to France than Britain, but both loyal to the crown.
It was lovely being able to sing God Save the King, you know, the first time that we've sung that in public. But very, very moving.
And King Charles, I think, is going to be a fantastic king. I think he's at retirement age and now he's got a full-time job, hasn't he?
From far and wide, people came to witness their own small slice of big history and to think of the future too.
Our king will be fantastic. He has a beautiful way with people. He knows exactly what the job is. He will carry it out seamlessly, effectively, and royally.
Today, the kingdom came together for its new king, but modern Britain is a place of devolved government, of leaders who sometimes pull in different directions. Charles III begins a tour of his realm this week. The sovereign remains the greatest symbol of the Union. John Ray, News at 10.
When Australia became a British colony more than 200 years ago, it would, of course, have taken weeks for the proclamation from London to reach the other side of the world. Half a day later, the same ceremony was repeated in the capital, Canberra, and in state capitals too. King Charles is Australians' new head of state. For Republican Australians, that is one tradition they hope will come to an end soon. But the Prime Minister has told us it is not a priority.
It may be the other side of the world to Britain, but the ceremony marking the accession of a new monarch was echoed in Canberra today. A formality carried out with solemn precision, witnessed by those whose ancestors have lived here for far longer than the British Crown has existed.
Because of the death of our blessed and glorious Queen Elizabeth II, the Crown has solely and rightfully come to Prince Charles Philip Arthur George, and with hearty and humble affection, we promise him faith and obedience.
The first formal rendition of God Save the King. The last time that was heard here, Australia hadn't even built this Parliament complex or Sydney's famous Opera House. But despite this profound change, today Australia's Prime Minister signalled a republic was still some way off.
The constitutional change that I have very clearly identified as my priority in this term of Parliament is the recognition of First Nations people in our Constitution. Our Constitution is our national birth certificate, and this nation didn't begin in 1788. It goes back some 65,000 years at least.
There's no doubt the Australian Prime Minister is avowedly Republican, but right now his focus is on ceremonies like this. Any constitutional change in Australia is likely to come if Labour wins a second term, and that could be years away. Despite the Prime Minister attempting to postpone the Republican debate, some watching this week feel it will be reignited anyway. Do you think it's inevitable?
Probably, unfortunately. Unfortunately, I'd say yes. It's probably time for a change, I think. Yeah, it's a tough one, but I think it is time for a change.
The Labour government has made it clear that before any referendum on the monarchy, it wants to prioritise better representation for Indigenous Australians, another sensitive and contentious issue which won't be easy to remedy. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Canberra.
And Dan joins us from Sydney, as you can see, where the sun is coming up. Dan, I mean, Australia's Prime Minister saying, of course, a referendum not a priority, but it sounds from your report and from everything one reads that for a lot of people they just view it as a matter of time.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly this will reignite the debate. As you heard, the Prime Minister is saying not until and only if Labour win a second term, but already the Green Party here are saying now is the time. Unsurprisingly, the head of the Republican movement here, Peter Fitzsimons, is saying there's a groundswell of support. The polling isn't clear though. The last major poll was in June, when only 44% of the Australian public said they wanted a republic, and that number had fallen. And that's not much more or about the same really as when they held a referendum here in 1999, and that idea was defeated. It's worth noting as well that when Prince William and Kate and baby George toured Australia in 2014, baby George was dubbed the Republican Slayer live on Breakfast TV here because he was deemed to be so popular with the British public. There's been no major polling, of course, since the Queen passed away, but I think the main problem here for Republicans will be trying to decide who and what would replace the monarch as head of state. And for anyone contemplating stepping into that role, they'll be very mindful that the Queen was a very hard act to follow.
OK, Dan, I do remember that was one of the reasons it foundered last time. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Now back here, Buckingham Palace has once again been a magnet for people from far and wide wanting to remember the Queen. The warm weather and the weekend have provided the chance for the young, and indeed they're not quite so young, to be part of a moment of history.
The sun still shines, and some things never change. But at Buckingham Palace, everything is different. And everyone wants to be here to see it, to feel it, and to capture it. The emotion still raw for Miguel, who's brought his 3 daughters.
It's difficult because I don't know why I'm crying. So, we just come to pay our respects. We thought it was important just to be here and say thank you.
There's comfort in coming together, a moment for every member of the family, no matter how far they've had to travel. For Cherie, the 10-hour round-trip journey from Skipton in Yorkshire is worth it.
So the children could have a great experience of coming down here and witnessing this moment, because it's a moment in history for these, isn't it, really?
The Queen's been reigning for the longest. Sad that the Queen died, but we have a king.
There is an endless stream of people pouring past Buckingham Palace today.
Generations of families, young and old, determined to be here to pay their respects and mark a moment in history.
Grace has travelled from Oxford with toddler Louis. Her next son will be born into a new age.
Your baby will never know life under Queen Elizabeth II. How does that make you feel?
It's really sad, but also exciting. We've got a new king.
Contrast that to those who've lived their whole lives in parallel to the Queen.
It's really, really upsetting for us older ones.
I'm glad people are all crowding around and doing the best they can.
The younger generation seemingly finding it easier to adapt to all the changes.
Oh, they sung the national anthem outside here because they know it word for word. They love the Queen, they love the royals.
They're going to have to learn the new words
They've
of the
got
national anthem.
Actually, they've actually picked it up really, really quickly. They actually do sing now the King. Mm-hmm. Go on then.
Gracious King, long live our noble King.
Rebecca Barry, News at 10, Buckingham Palace.
So let's just run through what is going to happen in the next few days, particularly if you're thinking to go and pay your own respects. Well, tomorrow afternoon, the Queen's coffin will process along Edinburgh's Royal Mile from Holyrood House to St Giles's Cathedral. King Charles and other members of the royal family will walk behind it while the public might get the chance to file past. On Tuesday evening, the coffin will leave Edinburgh by plane for Buckingham Palace. On Wednesday afternoon, the Queen's body will be moved to Westminster Hall for 4 days of lying in state, where people will again be able to pay their respects. We'll have a special programme I'll be presenting to cover that. And before the state funeral at Westminster Abbey, a week tomorrow, the 19th, the service begins at 11 a.m. We'll be covering it here with TV screens in Hyde Park as well on what is to be a public holiday. And there is, of course, much more on the rest of the week's events and coverage of the past 4 days on our website, together with analysis from our correspondents and our editors. As you know by now, that is itv.com/news. Now, the Queen's funeral a week tomorrow will be held in Westminster Abbey, as we were just saying, where she was married, where she was crowned, and where every year she took part in the annual Commonwealth service. Chloe is there. And Chloe, you've been speaking to the Dean of Westminster about the funeral.
That's right, Tom. Look, the British monarchy has a strong bond with this abbey that goes back a long way. It's where kings and queens have been crowned for the past 900 years, but this is the first time a monarch's funeral has been held here since the 18th century. And speaking about the significance of that today, the Dean of Westminster, who will be leading the service, said there is a really strong sense that people want to be part of this. And he said the location of this abbey will make it easier for them to feel like they are, as opposed to if it had been held somewhere more private, like Windsor, for example. He also spoke about the Queen's own deep personal bond with this abbey and about his memories of her.
There's a very particular relationship between this building and our Queen. This is the church in which she was married in 1947, and this is, of course, the place of coronation. When I was first appointed, I had an audience with Her Majesty, and it was really striking that the first thing we talked about was her memories of this place. She wanted to tell me why it was important to her.
30 kings and queens are buried beneath this abbey, but the Queen will not be buried here. After the service, her coffin will be taken by state hearse to St George's Chapel in Windsor, where she will be finally laid to rest with her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh.
Chloe, thank you very much. The future of the Queen's 2 remaining corgis has been decided. We've had a lot of questions about this, and they will go to Prince Andrew and his ex-wife, Sarah, the Duchess of York. The Queen had more than 30 corgis during her reign. She was given her first by her father way back in 1933. It was Andrew who gave her Mick and Sandy. Mick was named after a lock on the Balmoral estate. The new Prince of Wales, Prince William, says it will be an honour for him and Kate to serve the Welsh people. He spoke to the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, today and said they would be heading to Wales as soon as possible. The Prince said they held Wales in deep affection, having made their first family home in Anglesey when he was flying search and rescue helicopters. Let's move on to what seems even more tonight like a major Ukrainian fight back against the Russian invasion. 200 days after that invasion began, one American military think tank says Ukraine has retaken more territory in the past 5 days than Russia has taken since April. And now one of President Putin's key military allies, the leader of the Russian Republic of Chechnya, believes the Russian military leadership has made mistakes. It's astounding, he said today, and potentially worrying for the Russian president that he chose to say so.
After weeks of a grinding stalemate along 1,000 miles of the front line, there has now been a stunning collapse of Russian positions in the northeast. The Ukrainian offensive has mainly been in the Kharkiv region. The government in Kyiv regaining substantial territory and allowing their troops to raise their flag over dozens of towns and villages. As local Ukrainians greeted the newly arrived troops as liberators, it remains unclear if there is a broader collapse of Russian forces or if they are simply re-establishing a new front line to the east of the Oskol River. This amounts to the biggest reversal for Moscow since its humiliating failure to capture Kyiv in the earliest days of the war. The Ukrainian counter-offensive has seized as much as 1,000 square miles of territory previously held by Russia. The greatest success has been around Kharkiv. Notably, Ukrainian forces pushing north and east have recaptured several towns, including Izium to the south, an important railway hub. President Putin, seen here carrying on with routine appearances in Moscow this weekend, now faces an embarrassing military failure, and it raises the stakes still further. With his back to the wall, does he cede this lost territory or escalate still further? Most ominously for the Kremlin, a key Putin ally, the Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, who commands his own paramilitary forces fighting in Ukraine, has openly criticized Russia's handling of the war. Russia is striking back at Ukrainian infrastructure. This video, posted by President Zelensky himself, appears to show a missile attack on a power station in the Kharkiv region. The Ukrainian counter-offensive is unlikely to bring an end to the fighting, but it is a major morale boost for Kyiv and a significant reversal for Moscow.
And Robert joins me now to talk about all this. Robert, look, from the perspective of London, this looks like a pretty stunning counter-offensive by the Ukrainians and pretty worrying for Vladimir Putin in Moscow. But what's the reaction and the analysis in Western capitals?
Tom, I think one of the key points is that the Ukrainians are doing the fighting, but much of the success, or at least some of the success, is due to the flow of US intelligence to the Ukrainians, particularly about Russian military vulnerabilities, and of course as well the flow of Western weaponry, which has proved such a game changer on the battlefield. On one level, therefore, I think Western powers will be pleased to see, satisfied to see this apparent Russian rout. After all, it sort of vindicates the strategy they've adopted for the last 200 days. But on another, deeper, more speculative level, I think there will also be concern about what a bloodied and bruised Vladimir Putin does next. Does he seek, for example, to escalate? Does he threaten to use unconventional weapons on the battlefield? Does he seek perhaps to target and kill Ukraine's political leaders? Or does he acknowledge and accept this setback on the battlefield and go back to the negotiating table, seeking some kind of compromise, perhaps keeping Crimea but ceding other eastern territories? So those are all unclear, but clearly these are important and uncertain days and weeks ahead now.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come back to the Queen for a moment. And the Queen's favourite sport, horse racing, resumed today after a 2-day pause as a mark of respect. The big race was the final flat racing classic of the year, the St Leger. Frankie Dettori, on the right, who rode many times for the Queen, was among those taking part in a 2 minutes silence at Doncaster Racecourse as the sport remembered its most famous fan.
Estimate might just strike the front. Racing may be the sport of kings, but throughout her life it was the sport. Has won. One of her horses came.
Arm when she said, "I've done it," and of course it was one of the great moments. Everybody in the royal box was so excited for her. She just rushed down to the paddock, and all she really wanted to do was touch the horse again. She really, really loved her horses. It was an incredibly emotional time.
The Queen's passion for horses was sparked right at the very start of her life.
If responsibilities of high estate seem far removed on this brisk morning, they are nevertheless a very near prospect.
She grew into a fine horsewoman with a growing interest in thoroughbred races.
It was always part of her. She always knew her horses. They were part of the family. Her father, King George VI, had an Oaks winner called Sun Chariot. It was a brilliant mare. And the Queen went to see the filly at Beckhampton and stroked its beautiful, soft, satiny skin. And she always was supposed to have refused to wash her hand for 2 days because it's such a lovely feel.
It was here at the Royal Stud at Sandringham that the Queen indulged that interest and produced her fair share of winners.
There's Monaveen going up now.
Her first, Monaveen, delighted a princess in the stand at Hurst Park in 1950.
As he went on to increase his lead and bring off a clear-cut victory by 6 lengths, the princess's delight was no longer in doubt.
Another of her big stars was Oriole, seen here at the Coronation Derby in 1953.
What she used to love to do was come to the yard. I mean, that was her day out. She would wander through the barns and talk to all the lads and thoroughly enjoy it. It's a shame, really, that she couldn't come racing more often than she did, really. So what we tried to do, was get runners for her at Ascot.
Horses, of course, also played a role in the ceremony of the Queen's public life, most often at Trooping the Colour. Her horsemanship and her composure were put to the test in 1981 when someone in the crowd fired blank shots at her. Her Majesty didn't flinch. Private moments could be glimpsed at Sandringham, out or driving herself back and forth to the stable. This was her escape.
Horses were an escape because something she could do physically and go right on in her 90s she was riding. But also, without being trite about it, they didn't talk. You know, everybody wants to talk to the Queen or daren't talk to the Queen. The horse is going to be the same whether it's the Queen or you or me.
Horses were the Queen's great hobby. Racing and breeding these beautiful animals gave her a huge amount of pleasure. And they drew out aspects of her character, the attention to detail, the consideration for others, and the ability not to get too carried away with either the good times or the bad that defined so many parts of her life and reign.
And coming away, free agent, it's a royal winner.
Such was the Queen's devotion to public duty. The pleasures that she enjoyed in the few hours of spare time she allowed herself were very rarely seen. Horses were her most precious pastime. She couldn't have done without her racing, and racing will certainly miss her.
Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
The joy in her face at that victory is really quite a memory. Let's return, though, to Edinburgh for a last word for tonight, at least, from Chris. Chris, today, I guess, was a sort of indication of really what we're going to expect, sort of growing and growing over the next few days. But what were your reflections on today?
Well, you know, Tom, it's my job to find the right words to describe events of a particular day. I just found today was very difficult to actually do that. I think from the moment we saw the coffin exit the gates of Balmoral Castle, after we had heard that 6 gamekeepers from the Queen's estate had carried it from the ballroom. I think that was the moment that it probably hit a lot of people in this country. Yes, we've been reporting on the death of the Queen since Thursday, but seeing her coffin for the first time and leave Royal Deeside, I thought was really quite an emotional moment. And you saw it in some of the people we had in the programme earlier on. And then just that sort of instinctive tribute that people wanting to give, whether it was lining up some tractors or horses, or simply standing on top of a motorway junction just to see for a fleeting moment. Don't forget, I mean, we were watching the helicopter pictures, but if you were there, you would have only seen the Queen pass beneath you for a fleeting moment. I thought it was a real indication, as you just said, of what is going to come. This was a big move, 6-hour move today. There are events, of course, tomorrow, and then there's this whole issue of the lying in state in London, and I believe we're going to find out tomorrow exactly how people will be able to apply to file past her coffin when the Queen lies in state in Westminster Hall, that magnificent building in the Palace of Westminster. So we saw a lot today, but there's a lot to come.
And, for the new king, I mean, he's mourning, but there's a lot of business. I mean, that's going to dominate his week to a high degree, isn't it?
Yes, and I mean, today's business for the King was quite administrative, I suppose. He had some audiences at Buckingham Palace. A big day for the new King tomorrow, both in terms of going to the Westminster Parliament, but then flying here, where I am right now, where he will receive the ceremony of the keys here in Edinburgh, and then walk behind his mother's coffin with other members of the family to that historic cathedral on the Royal Mile. A beautiful setting, of course, Edinburgh. You couldn't think of a better city for any of this to happen.
OK, Chris, for now at least, thank you very much indeed. So, as we've been discussing, as the Queen's body began its journey towards London, King Charles is preparing to head out across his new kingdom. Join us for that, incidentally, the King's Tour on ITV at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Today, the King began work in the grandest office in the land, Buckingham Palace, meeting the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, a signal of intent, perhaps. Outside, even at night, the boulevard of bouquets is lengthening. Tomorrow, the King will be in Edinburgh, as Chris said, to follow his mother's body into St Giles's Cathedral for a special service. Tonight, she lies in the throne room of Holyrood House, the last monarch to die in Scotland since the Scottish King James IV nearly 500 years ago. From all of us, good night, and thank you very much for watching.
Hello again, a very good evening to you.